you also mentioned right toward the end of the book that often the RSS now is considered to be a very militant organization, right? And it's a fascist organization that perhaps espouses Hindutva militancy in some way. And you say that it is very different from some of the other Hindu militant groups that exist right now, and you make distinctions. Could you perhaps talk more about that?
Yeah. I would say to you that Savarkar was far more militant in his ideology than Hedgewar, which is why they actually rubbed each other, right? Which is why Hedgewar never allowed the Hindu Mahasabha to co-opt the RSS, right? Which is why he never allowed Bose, who was a fascist, to co-opt the RSS. And Bose and Savarkar both wanted to co-opt the RSS, right? Let's be clear about that. So I think there's something to be said about that. I think the Hedgewarian view of the world, I think, is that you had to be tough guys because the society expected you and needed you to be tough guys. But you were not meant to other on caste, class, and creed, including creed meaning religion, so therefore Christians, Muslims. In the Hedgewarian mind, I believe, it's conjecture, Muslims can join the RSS. Christians can join the RSS. They can be part of these social nodes, social capital, social network. But the red line is not religion. It's Deshbhakti.
Right.
And this is where it gets different, because I think the ideology of Savarkar is you have to be Hindu. I think in the creed sense, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm misreading that, I don't know. But certainly from the Hedgewarian perspective, it's not that. The red line is not your religion and how you worship. It's actually how rooted do you feel to the land, the soil itself. Now, let me just, if you will allow me. Hedgewar preaches, and Hedgewarianism is rooted in Deshbhakti. Savarkarism, if I can call it that, is rooted in patriotism. These are two different things. A patriot, by its very psychological definition, is somebody who has created a in-group, and that in-group is usually on ethnicity, it's usually on religion, and in India's case, maybe caste. Yeah. And then it tries to capture the Rajya. Okay. A patriot is always thinking about the state. So the BJP is a political nationalist movement.
Okay.
It's trying to capture the Rajya, and it's trying to leverage the Rajya to fulfill its ends, whatever they are. RSS doesn't do that. RSS has, as far as Hedgewarian thought is concerned, the RSS should not be interested in the Rajya. That is not the job of the RSS. The RSS should only be creating social capital and looking after the Rashtra.
So
right?
Deshbhakti for you and the way you understood
is not patriotism.
It's not patriotism. So then is it...
Deshbhakti is much more of the Frommian, the Eric Fromm, Frommian sense of rootedness. Okay. That's Deshbhakti. So what do I mean by that? So let me just explain that. So if patriotism is where you create an in-group based on a class, caste, or creed, and then you try and capture the Rajya, that's patriotism. And notice the forms of patriotism throughout world history, across cultures. Sure. You'll see this. On the other side, you have Deshbhakti, which I think is quite unique. A lot of pagan cultures do have this, but it's rare. But again, I think it's quite unique to Hedgewar and Hedgewarianism. But Deshbhakti is where basically you have this psychological fusion where the self is dissolved somewhat into the land. My identity is somehow rooted to this land itself. And therefore, if this land produces trees, rivers, mountains, and people, they are mine. Now, whether that person is a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Jain or a Christian or a Hindu matters not. You are mine. So when the Hedgewarian, when Mohan Bhagwat or anybody, a senior leadership of the RSS says, all Muslims are Hindus or something like this, right? Maybe I'm caricaturing it, I don't know. But when they say these things, I think they're referring to the Hedgewarian mind of Deshbhakti. That actually, if you are a Deshbhakt, regardless of your religion, you are one of us.
If you liked the episode, please leave your key takeaways in the comments. It helps us decide future episodes. And of course, make sure you follow Dostcast on Spotify. Dostcast to the moon.
if you are not a Deshbhakt, and it doesn't matter if you go to a temple, it doesn't matter what caste you belong to, it doesn't matter, you're the other. And the RSS will oppose you.
Got it. I think there's a great analogy for this, which is, have you seen the movie Avatar?
Yes, quite right.
The Navi population respects the land. Even when they hunt, they say a prayer, they are off the land, they are off the trees, and it's a very cohesive unit. And then this very America's patriotic expansion takes them to space, and they want to colonize this colony of people who are living peacefully. That is a clash of those two ideologies, probably.
Correct. Voltaire warned us about patriotism.
When? In Candide?
Voltaire throughout. So I quote Voltaire at length in the book, in the original French, because it's lovely, and then in the English translation. And Voltaire warns us about patriotism. I think Hedgewar, by the way, was heavily exposed to Western philosophy, Western intellectuals when he was growing up in his formative years, and I think the warning that Voltaire gives us, I think Hedgewar internalizes it. I think Hedgewar knew the dangers of patriotism, which is why for him the line was Deshbhakti and not patriotism.
Yeah, it's also very interesting that you mention Hedgewarianism. A lot of the ism, it reflects on your backgrounds in philosophy. Generally, people just, when people come and talk about historical figures, they talk about the things they said. But it seems to me you have a motive to perhaps spread this style of philosophy for those who are watching and listening, because you think it's still potent.
I think Hedgewarian thought is a systematized thought process. I don't think it's just comments or speeches that he gave, which is what would make him a historical figure, right? I actually think he had a coherent sense of philosophy, which he was projecting and manifesting through his creation, right? Through two things, through the RSS, but through the Pracharak order. To understand Hedgewarianism and Hedgewarian thought, you have to understand the behavior and the motivations of the Pracharak order. And it is an order. I think in English, in all English literature, I keep hearing this word, full-time volunteers. That is such a euphemism. Such a euphemism. These people, this Pracharak order, that's potent. That's potent. And Pracharaks are like what I compare them to the old medieval friars of Christianity. Right? Anybody who knows what friars are, you've got in an instant as to the devoted nature of these Pracharaks.
I've heard the word, I don't know what that means.
So a friar in Europe, medieval Europe, was basically men mostly, who took up vows, hence the order, of abject poverty, right? Non-possession of anything personal, no family, but they would be part of the society, unlike monks who retreated into the monasteries and just prayed for salvation.
Right.
Friars lived in the society to reform the society. That's what the friaries were doing in medieval Europe. One of the reasons why Europe developed so fast during the Enlightenment period is because of the spread and the social capital that friars had spread all over the medieval world during that time. So the Pracharaks are men and women, Pracharikas, who take on these vows. They don't own anything. They don't have any homes. They can't marry. They don't have children, right? And they work and live and mix completely within the everyday common man and woman. And so you don't notice them. But they're everywhere. And there's thousands of them. And these guys are what Professor Antrim calls the devoted actor, where the self has been dissolved into the philosophy. The philosophy and the self have become one. That's the devoted actor. And so I think, and you can't take it too far. I'm not saying all Pracharaks are this ingrained, but certainly if you follow the Pracharak order long enough, you're going to become the devoted actor. And therefore that is potent.
If you love this episode, make sure you leave a note at the end so we know what more to make of. And of course, follow Dostcast on Spotify, Dostcast to the moon.